Here at Residence, feedback is everything. But how do you measure the success of a creative project? What kinds of things do you want to learn from your team after the project wraps? Recently, our colleagues at Buck created a new value-based metric framework to answer some of those questions. And our CEO, Jim Babb, sat down with Buck's Chief Design Officer, Ben Langsfeld, to talk about it.
When we think about, being in the service industry and having like a professional service business, there's a lot of things that we are able to measure, and some of those things are easier than others. And I'm curious, when you think about that, what are the hard things to measure, but what are the ones that are probably most important in your mind?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to just me observing behavior and understanding kind of what how we've evolved over the years. And we've done a really great job of bridging our finance and our production data into really useful tools to honestly shape and manage our behavior. And so what I was yearning for was, having a seat at the table for our creative practice, our partnership practice, a lot of the things that we hold dear to our values and our responsibility to our partners. There wasn't really anything to be able to track that.
How do you define a value-based metric anywhere? And I know you're thinking about a lot of different types of indicators and a lot of different things that you're asking teams, but what's your perspective around how you even define it from the first, to take a step back?
To take a step back, I took a look at our language that we used every day. And I felt like if I could come up with the kinds of questions we're constantly asking ourselves when a job's coming in, when we are working towards delivery, when we are, what the questions are that we're asking when we're, casting talent onto a project to build that perfect team. So by asking ourselves those questions or listening to the questions that we constantly ask ourselves, I was able to truly understand what it is that we're wrestling with on a day-to-day basis. There's just so much that can go into a life cycle of a project. So it's kind of doing ourselves a disservice by thinking that we know too much going into a project. We know a lot more coming out of a project. So by listening to our process, listening to the questions we ask ourselves, I was able to sort of bucket them into these tranches that then could build a framework for us to understand truly what it was that we were trying to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always think of it like courses in high school or college where you don't really know from looking at the syllabus whether it's going to be a good class or not. You don't know how creative fulfilling. Sometimes, the process of creativity, the unlock, it can be the, most industrial and, industry maybe is the most creative fulfilling because of the factors that you didn't know about it with it, where a really exciting, well-known brand can also be really hard creatively to have an impact on or to get that sense of accomplishment from a team. Why is it important to do it at a project level versus, just sort of the vibe for the year or other ways of doing the measurement around the work itself?
I think there's just a lot of biases that we put in place when we're, living in the moment. I think we've made a career and owe a lot of our success to taking a very in the moment point of view of how we approach everything. So it's always just like next project. It's kind of very much like sports, like next play, and you kind of forget what happened and move on to the next. It's always easy to, forget the pain from a really hard project and you kind of sweep it under the rug. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we had a true timestamp. You don't just do your finances at the end of the year and you say, oh, did we make our budget or not? You're tracking it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, you're closing quarters. So I wanted to align to our other practices and our other, sources of measurement so that we could have an honest conversation about what it felt like. We would go into these finance meetings when we would close a month and everyone would be looking at the margins and the EBITDA and our fixed comp. And we'd be super stoked, like, oh, we crushed it this month. But really inside, I knew that was really a hard month for our team. And I wanted to be able to have some data to back that up.
I like the idea of, it's one of our values is tight feedback loops. And the more frequently you're capturing these metrics, the more easy it is to make decisions from them. But also, your real goal is being able to advocate for things that are a little softer, but potentially actually are the things that are going to, for a creative company, to help them actually grow and scale and continue to have impact. I know you're in the early stages of rolling this out, but when you think both short-term and long-term, what types of benefits do you kind of envision for, both the creative team, and I'm going to ask you the same for the client, but we can start with the team itself.
One of the talks that really inspired the framework was from one of our GCD, or two of our GCDs at one of our leadership summits last year, where they were talking about the tension between creative excellence and creative fulfillment. And a lot of times when we look at both of them, creative excellence is like something that we strive for as a business, like always trying to put out the best possible work we can. But you can throw creative fulfillment under the bus to get there, right? You can really push hard, you can grind, and that's something that, in the right circumstances is totally wonderful. But knowing that you're making that choice and that it is going to have a long-term impact on your team and your talent is important. One of the best data points I saw was that 2/3 of the projects recognized a career growth opportunity for one of the team members on the project, whether that be art director really showing up in a new role, whether that be a designer taking on some stuff they've never really taken on before, but they really showed up. Seeing those signals is something that you can't just, at our scale, I can't see that in every project. There's hundreds of projects happening at a time. So knowing that that's happening and ensuring that people are getting those opportunities is really valuable for me to be able to talk to our teams about.
Yes, scale seems to be
we give them,
Yeah, scale seems to be the real thing this is solving for, because, I think about, my size of team and how close I know what's going on across, and those things you're talking about are things that I'm actively involved with as a leader. And I can understand that, at the scale that Buck operates at, and, with contractors and partners and all those things mixed into it, you get so much more complexity across that.
Yeah, we've distributed workload in a nice way that there is oversight across most projects, but where's the oversight over that, right?
I'm curious what you think about, what are the effects of this on a client's organization or business? Obviously I think there's us not doing projects that we could do, but that the team doesn't have the heart for, and we know that,
right.
And it means that we're not going to excel at them. But I'm curious, what does it mean in terms of creative excellence for a client?
I mean, I think, our value prop for our partners is to provide the most effective partnership we can, the most frictionless experience, a great quality, client experience from end to end, and making sure that there's no creative fall off at any given point in the project or subsequent projects. So, we want to make sure that we are showing up correct and sort of fulfilling that promise, but we're also going to be a little bit more careful about what we get ourselves into, knowing that, we've done this 5 times before and it's ended this way. So you know what, we might not be the right partner for this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, when you think about frictions, they're not always a bad thing, right? I think, especially like you're saying, in stretching into new areas, being able to identify those means that leadership can help make the next one easier. Just because something is showing up in this value-based survey as maybe not as positive as it could be, doesn't mean that it's not something you should be doing, but it's an indicator of something else in terms of a way of working, or how the team was staffed, how the scope was written, how we're approaching it. And so it gives you visibility on where the places that as a leader you should focus, not necessarily just we shouldn't do that work.
And it also just takes the emotion out of it too. So like you're saying, there is no bad answer. There's no guilt associated with any of the data I'm collecting, where when I remember being, on those projects, leading those projects, I had this I was shouldering a lot of emotion on how a project went. If a project was really challenging for my team, I felt it, but by taking these questions and spinning it in a way where it's truly about understanding and trying to really get the full picture of what happened and how it happened is the only way we can get better.
We've been talking a little abstract about these measures, but I'm curious, because as you've been running this, like what are there certain questions that you feel are starting to, in the things you are measuring that you feel are starting to bubble up to be either more important or either surprising in that way?
One of the big aha moments was looking at, the team experience. Was it challenging? Was it enjoyable? Was it a highlight or was it a burner? And the whole concept of a burner is really interesting, and it has sparked a lot of debate internally, because what we've noticed is that when when people are answering these questions, there is this like sentimental kind of connection between the really challenging projects and the fulfillment. People find a lot of fulfillment from really challenging projects. You don't want to overload everyone with challenging projects all of the time, because you will lead to long-term burnout. But you can't assume that a burner is not an enjoyable experience. And so by separating,
in the moment, but you're right. Like it's like a bad camping trip, right? Where it has the best stories when it's
best story, or you feel the most like you accomplished something, you grew the most, you probably don't want to ask those questions on the next week, but maybe a month or two down the line, you can see the shift where they almost yearn for that project again, because it was such a high stakes. It was,
you got to perform high in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And then also if you're with a high performing team, like it brings you together, but you're right. Like it's, I think that's interesting, especially as you start thinking about across these, like the cadence of it.
Another point that's risen to the top is, again, around, I'd say, the difference and the tension between reach. We have this one that's about reach and impact. Like, is this something that's going to be really impactful in culture? Or is this something that's going to be, have low visibility, be more like a B2B or like internal team and maybe never see the light of day, associated with, can we share the work? And, I think a lot of the value that our teams get from the work they do is being able to celebrate it, on socials or on their portfolio. But what we notice is that over half of the projects that we do, we can't share. And so that has a large impact, especially if it's a high impact, high visible job that we're not able to talk about. So that has like a cognitive kind of load and ding on our team's creative fulfillment. So that's something that we continue to watch out for.
Yeah, you're connecting, the work to the individual and to their effort, and to be able to highlight that it's their project, even if it's a brand or something else. I can see why that's so important to a creative person, to be able to have your stamp on it and put in your portfolio, but to really be able to talk about and celebrate is that's why I think why we do the work we do.
This is also a exercise in educating and understanding that this is a process and in a business, and a lot of things we can control and a lot of things we can't. And so this is helping people understand that what we can control is something that we should be looking at, studying, and ensuring that we are, backing it up with our behavior.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's been good to unpack this with you. And I really do think it's going to be really interesting to look at, what are those top projects of the year and why, and how does a team go from a burner to another one, and how's that impacted? I think you're just going to have such interesting data to look at. Yeah,
I'm excited to sort of see what a complete set truly looks like when we, hone the experience to something that's super sharp and clean and clear, and people understand why the questions are being asked, and they understand why the answers are the way they are. And so maybe we'll have a date next year, and I'll let you know how it's going. Yeah, I think so. I think the rest of the the creative industry is going to find some of these types of things really interesting too. So hopefully if anyone's interested, I don't know if this part's going to make it into the video, but you can comment below, and maybe we'll convince Buck and Ben to share a little
little teasers of what
behind
those
the
programs are.
yeah,
Yeah.
behind the scenes and some insights. It sounds great.